And welcome back, fellow football fanatics. I know that some of you were with me just 30, 40 minutes ago, but we're here for the weekly college football roundtable. Missed it last week, but we're back and I love it. Make sure to make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and also check out Darren Talks Ball, who's joining us yet again. Subscribe to his channel, hit his notification bell. Make sure to subscribe to Corn Nation, hit the notification bell as they're joining us. Thank you, Minnie, for coming on. And we also have a follower of my channel, follower of many Nebraska channels, who I think is pretty intelligent and objective based on his analysis. Thank you, LSU VS Far, for joining us. So he's filling in for a guest that I thought could make it, but couldn't. So thank you for coming on here. We're going to do what we did in the first 2 weeks. This time, the focus is just going to be on Michigan versus Nebraska. We'll touch on Illinois, Indiana as well, and just really go over this week 4 series of games. I want to start off by asking the three of you, and Darren, you'll kick this off. What do you think about the line? What do you think about FPI, for example, thinking that Nebraska should be favored? Many of the analysts are picking Nebraska, though some are picking Michigan too. And yet that line is sitting there -1.5, -2, 2.5, even 3.
Yeah, I think this is actually a pretty evenly matched game. I was going through some of the game on paper stats for each of these teams. A couple of things that are kind of glaring to me and kind of lent me to lean in a certain direction as to where I think this game may go. But if you're believing like things like SP Plus, pretty evenly matched game. If you look at just purely the SP Plus rankings, Michigan 18th, Nebraska 21st. Michigan 46th in offensive SP plus, Nebraska 43rd, Michigan 4th in defensive SP plus, Nebraska 9th. Nebraska does look like they're like 119th currently in special teams SP plus, so that was rather interesting to me. First and foremost here, I haven't gotten to watch too much Nebraska so far this season, though I did go back and watch the game against Cincinnati. And they look like I kind of think where we would kind of expect Nebraska to be in some aspects, given that Matt Rule is still kind of trying to turn that thing around. Dylan Raiola is still kind of, rising on the arc or the trajectory of a 5-star quarterback, still learning the game and getting better and improving. And a defense that I myself and many others expected to remain pretty good this season. So Michigan, in a lot of ways, is kind of in the same position with Bryce Underwood developing through these first 3 games. Been a bit of a roller coaster. The Oklahoma game was a disappointing one for us Michigan fans. But it seems like they've really kind of pulled the reins off of Bryce too. 114 rushing yards this past weekend. And obviously Michigan, another team that plays really good defense. So like a typical Big Ten game, I think this is going to come down to trench play. It's going to come down to who can run the ball better, who can better support their quarterback and kind of give him, that performance around him that he can kind of lean on, and who plays better defense and who plays better special teams.
Okay, I guess that's to me then, yeah. Well, the thing about the differences between Nebraska and Michigan that really stand out to me is that they've had to kind of rediscover who they are, right? Especially not having Sharon Moore as their head coach for the last game. And then now again for Nebraska, first Big Ten conference game that they chose to kind of take that one off is kind of, it sticks in Nebraska's craw. Let's just say that. We're not happy about that. They've been to Memorial Stadium over the last, since 2021, 2023, and really just embarrassed us. And it's time that we show them show everyone that we're actually a good team. And I think we have all the pieces together. I know you said that we're showing that we're 119th in special teams. We have an elite special teams at this point. I mean, there's a couple of things that we need to work on, but we have one heck of a kicker. We have one heck of a punter. Returns are doing great. So I'm very confident in that, as well as our offense scoring. I believe even though Michigan has an elite defense, we also have an elite offense. Our offensive line is full of veteran players. And in fact, in the last game, we had 16 different linemen that played more than 10 snaps. And so we're running through our first string, our second string, our third string. So all along the way in the last 3 games, we've just been building on that Cincinnati game. Our defense, we have a veteran secondary. As long as we can put pressure and make Bryce Underwood throw, I think that we are going to be solid because we're just going to force some mistakes. So that's kind of where I'm standing with this game. And plus, like I said, Huskers really want it.
Yeah, so did me. So I think that the line movement really reflects just kind of how much volatility this game kind of presents. There's a saying that styles make fights, and I think when you look at where Michigan and Nebraska are both strong, you really kind of see how that could come out. And, if I told you Michigan was going to rush for 250 yards, then you'd say, okay, Nebraska's getting smoked. And if I told you Nebraska passes for 300 yards, you'd say, all right, well, Michigan's probably out of the game there, right? So we're seeing two teams who, really kind of wanted to, or who really excel at two very different areas, right? Nebraska does have issues with its D line. If you put back Nash Hutmacher and Ty Robinson, I think Nebraska's probably favored by a touchdown, maybe a little more in this game. But Ty Robinson and Hutmacher are gone, right? There are new guys. They've kind of gotten pushed around and struggled to create pressure when they're not blitzing the quarterback. And so, I think if you're Nebraska, right, you want to shut down the run at whatever cost, right? And I think if you're Michigan, right, offensively, you kind of want to go to like vintage Wisconsin style game plan, ground and pound, grind things down. Don't put Bryce Underwood in a position where he might lose you the game, use his athleticism to your advantage. And meanwhile, if you're Nebraska, right, you want to stop the run at all costs. You want to try and put things on Bryce Underwood, and you want to try and make Bryce Underwood go out and win Michigan the game. And so I think that, I think there's a lot of variance in this game and just how it could go. I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if Michigan struggled to run the ball and Nebraska pulled ahead a little bit. And at the same time, if Michigan shuts down Nebraska's passing attack and they're able to keep going with the rushing attack, I wouldn't be surprised if this game kind of got away from Nebraska a little bit.
Yeah, I think that it's a pretty 50-50 evenly matched game with two teams that excel at very different things. Michigan, I think they excel more at your stereotypical Big Ten traits: trench play, size, running the ball, stopping the run. Nebraska, I think, is a little bit more modern in its approach, at least from what we're seeing in terms of results. I know Michigan wants to be modern. That's why they got Bryce Underwood. That's why they hired Chip Lindsey. And that's why they are running some of the concepts they are now, where they're more willing to hit downfield passing attacks and they try to get their receivers involved. I do think that, to your point, Far, that if Nebraska had a much better defensive line, they'd probably be a significantly better team, as that's like one of their biggest, if not their biggest weakness. And therefore they would be favored. But based on FPI and preseason priors and odds to win the Big Ten and things like that, I think that the line added with all those things shows that right now Michigan is viewed by the books as the slightly better team, so much so that home field advantage doesn't tilt the line over in Nebraska's favor. I want to lead into what Minnie said a little bit about Nebraska wanting it. And I understand that standpoint. I even talked about it in my preview video. But I think Michigan needs this game too, in a certain sense, really badly, because of they already have one loss. And if you lose this game, how are you going to hold up against USC or Ohio State realistically? So let's have some fun and a little bit of a debate. And before we get into more of our picks and any final analysis, let me know who you think needs this game more and why.
Is it back on me now? We're just doing the laps around the screen here. Okay, I just
Yes,
wanted to make
exactly.
sure. Yeah, I have trouble with these debates because it's like every team wants to win every game, right? And especially in conference. I know there's a bit of like maybe a personal aspect to this for Nebraska. I can't speak for Matt Rule and Nebraska, obviously. But maybe there is a bit of a chip on the shoulder that Sharon Moore decided to take one of these games off. The funny thing about that is in like Michigan circles this week, myself included, on my This Week in Michigan Football podcast, I talked about it, where it was interesting that we had the offensive performance we did against Oklahoma, where there was like a hesitancy to run with Bryce Underwood and really let him let it rip. And then Sharon Moore had the week off this past week as part of the suspension. And Biff Poggi comes out as the head coach, the interim head coach. And one of the first things he did was he just let Bryce Underwood rip it. And that's why we had the 114 yards on the ground, 250 something or 235, I think it was, through the air. And you really saw the Bryce Underwood show for the first time, I think, the full package, because there were some called quarterback runs. There was some quarterback counter. There was like a quarterback G lead. Then went for a touchdown. Then there were some scramble runs. He was as accurate as he's been all season, throwing downfield as well. A lot of half field reads that they've been doing with him and flood concepts to get him rolling out, which he seems very comfortable with. So the Sharon Moore suspension thing might put a chip on Nebraska's shoulder, and that might give them more incentive to win the game. But at the same time, it seems like Biff Poggi is handling Bryce Underwood maybe even better than the head coach is in some ways, because he had an excellent performance, albeit against a lesser opponent this past week. And to speak to Farr's point on the volatility with the line, I think that's part of why that we're seeing that is there's a lot of uncertainty with this game in terms of how Bryce Underwood's going to perform in just his fourth start. And also there's several players for Michigan like Rod Moore, amongst others, that could be playing, might not be playing. And like, for one, if Rod Moore plays, that makes a big difference in this game. So yeah, as far as who has more incentive to win it, I don't know. It's a conference game. They both really want to win it. It's important for both teams, for the Big Ten, obviously.
Okay, I gotta address one thing real quick. Just the thing with Biff Poggi. Is it Poggi or Poggi? I've heard it pronounced a couple different ways, but he's wonderful. I love him. Is it Poggi?
Poggi. I don't think he minds
Poggi.
however you pronounce it personally, but I've been saying Poggi.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay. Biff Poggi. Cool guy. Love just hearing his press conferences already. You can tell he's comfortable behind a mic. He reminds you a little bit of Mike Leach. Love that he's, saying that the quarterback is like Batman. We need to, test his DNA, just all the hype that he's able to create just by telling stories. But it's not rocket science that, when your freshman quarterback is being tested and has had struggles, that when you have your opportunity against, a lesser opponent, that you're going to let him build some confidence, right? And I think that's exactly what he did. I mean, that's, I think, what most people would do, most coaches. So I don't know if you're going to do the same thing against a Big Ten team with a Big Ten defense, regardless of if there are some struggles on the defensive line or not. But that being said, I feel like Nebraska definitely needs this win. We circled this game on our calendar at the beginning of the year. We had hoped that we would get to this point 3-0, and we did. We didn't screw it up in typical Nebraska fashion, and we did what we needed to do. We grew in every single game, and just taking it easy, trusting in the process, trusting the players, trusting Dylan. And I really feel like, I was at the Colorado game last year, and Memorial Stadium was really loud, so loud. I'm sure you guys have heard the stories. I was at the Cincinnati game this year. It was loud there too, but I think that Memorial Stadium is going to be even louder. The hype behind this game is huge because it's Matt Rule's third year, and he typically takes that jump, right, in his third year of coaching. He's put together so many A-plus components coming from, our offensive coordinator, our defensive coordinator, our special teams. We have all the playmakers that we need, as well as, I don't know if you knew this, but Bud Crawford is the boxer that just won the championship on Saturday night. He's from Omaha, and he's linked heavily with Nebraska Huskers. There's talk about him leading the team out on Saturday. So all of Nebraska's behind him.
So I think it'd be great for Nebraska to win this game. And, Nebraska would almost 85% chance they're ranked if they beat Michigan here. But I guess if we want to talk about job security, Sharon Moore probably needs this a little more than Matt Rule. And I don't say that lightly. Michigan plays Wisconsin, Purdue, Northwestern, Maryland. Those are probably 4 of the worst teams in the Big Ten this upcoming year. But then, like you said, Sam, they also play USC. They also play Ohio State. I don't know that Washington's going to be a pushover team. And so if Michigan loses to Nebraska here, that kind of makes you question what Michigan's capable of. And let's say they lose to Nebraska, lose to USC, lose to Ohio State. I don't think losing to Washington's out of the question. And if Sharon Moore comes out of the season going 7-5, I think he's probably got some issues. And, Oklahoma might be a good team. I don't have a whole lot of respect for Brent Venables as a coach. I think Lincoln Riley, granted, I know he pretty much robbed the team when he left, but he didn't leave behind, breadcrumbs in the pantry. And Brent Venables really hasn't done anything to make you think he's going to be an elite coach at Oklahoma. However, I'll also hit this from a different angle. If you're the Big Ten, who do you want to win? Because as I said, granted, Michigan has more fans. Michigan's a more national brand. But Michigan's also dropped a game to Oklahoma already. And what if Oklahoma isn't a playoff team? What if Oklahoma gets into SEC play and they go 8-4 or something like that, and they just don't look that impressive? I think the ceiling up Michigan could hit is kind of limited, right? We know that Michigan can't get past Oklahoma. We pretty clearly saw that. I think that potential's still out there for Nebraska. I'm not saying they're definitely better for Oklahoma or something, but I think Nebraska has more upside. But of course, I'm not gonna trick myself into believing that the Big Ten refs are gonna come out supporting Nebraska, because as a Nebraska fan, I know that's never been the case as far as I've seen.
I think that from a fan and emotional standpoint, Nebraska probably needs it more. But I can't help but think that with Michigan already dropping that game to Oklahoma, and the fact that I think the conference schedule, as I see it right now, is probably more favorable to Nebraska. I mean, think about Minnesota losing to Cal in a very humiliating fashion. UCLA's dead. Northwestern is even worse than I thought they would be, and I didn't think they'd go bowling. Michigan also has to play them. And Iowa is, Iowa. And I think, Michigan has to travel to USC. Nebraska gets USC at home. I think that from a win-loss perspective and from a factoring in expectations perspective, Michigan expects to get to the playoffs. Nebraska just, I think, expects. I think Nebraska would be much happier with 9 wins than Michigan would be. Like Nebraska going 9-3 for the first time since 2016 except it would be a stronger 9-3 because you're no longer in the Big Ten West, would make fans ecstatic. That would be awesome. And then the opportunity to get the 10th win in the bowl game. If Michigan goes 9-3, unless that 9-3 is a strong finish with a win over Ohio State, they are not going to be happy. It will be another year where they are told that outside of a 3-year window in which there was a cheating scandal, they haven't won anything. That will make them and probably the administration and staff very, very angry. So, I'm a Michigan fan, student. So I'm trying to be objective here. And I think that in being objective, I'd probably slightly lean Michigan here. I think that Nebraska can get to the playoffs if they lose this game still, because there is a chance that Michigan is their worst matchup outside of Penn State and even the second best team on their schedule outside of Penn State. I in no way believe that Nebraska is the best team remaining on Michigan's schedule. That's Ohio State. And the advanced metrics would say that USC is better than Nebraska. We'll see if that remains the case. So I would lean with Michigan here, needing this. Moving on to our predictions and giving some background as to why we're making the picks we are. Darren, start us off. Who are you picking and a little bit of why?
Okay, so I've been looking. I took some notes earlier. Again, I'm a stats nerd, as anyone who follows my channels, plural. We got This Week in Michigan Football now, by the way, that you guys should check out. It's a weekly podcast where all I do is talk about Michigan. And I just have to say, like, after looking at these stats for the last few minutes, as you guys were talking about Nebraska, and I do really like Nebraska. I'm glad they're in the Big Ten. It was a little disjointing, by the way, when I saw them play in Cincinnati a few weeks ago. And I was like, why does this feel so disjointing? I was like, wait, Nebraska's now in the Big Ten. I know they've been in the Big Ten for a while, but I'm old. Nebraska's now in the Big Ten and Cincinnati's in the Big 12. And it just like didn't feel right for a second, just like knowing that, but I digress. There's something we got to pump the brakes on here. And I'm sorry, but I got to lay it out there. I'm looking at Nebraska's run defense and I'm seeing, Nebraska's defense generally negative 0.05 adjusted EPA per play. That's only good for 51st. 4.95 yards per rush given up. That's 88th in the country. And then I thought, well, that's probably due to the quarterback runs that they gave up against Cincinnati. They had the one game where they gave up some good runs. No, even when you take out the sacks that they had against Akron still averaged 4.5 yards per carry. And then Sean Patrick, the running back for Akron himself, the starting running back for Akron, averaged 5.3 yards per carry against Nebraska. And then you see the most recent game against HCU, which they did a really good job defending the run on the stat sheet there as well. But again, against HCU, which I honestly don't even know what level of college football they play. Someone can let me know if they're like FCS or whatever. I assume they're FCS. I'd honestly never even heard about them before they played this game. They had a runner that hit a 45-yarder. A 45-yard run play that led to him getting 6.3 yards per carry against Nebraska. And then overall, if you take out the quarterback sacks, which they did have 4 sacks in that game, which pats on backs for that. You got 4 sacks against an FCS team, but they still averaged around 4 yards per carry if you take out the sacks, like if you do the quarterback sack adjusted yards per carry there. And I'm looking at Michigan's offensive line, which is only getting better as we're getting into the season. A couple of injuries along the offensive line, but it looks like Nate Afobe and Jake Garnera have stepped up pretty big time there. And then I look at Justice Haynes and Jordan Marshall, 2 guys who Justice Haynes, former number 1 overall recruit in his class at the running back position. We saw what he was able to do, breaking off a big run against Oklahoma, who, by the way, I just looked it up, has the 5th best defense according to SP Plus right now. And I have to disagree with you, Farah. I really think Oklahoma is a really good team. That's one of the best defensive fronts in the entire nation right there, with guys like David Stone, Jaden Jackson. The list goes on and on over there with former 5-star players. So my problem is, can Nebraska stop Michigan's ground game? Because we know Michigan's going to run the football. And by the way, these days with Chip Lindsey as the offensive coordinator, they're doing a lot more. It used to be with Sharon Moore and Jim Harbaugh, you just saw duo kick, gap scheme, pin and pull. Now they're running stretch. Now they're running a lot more inside zone. Now they're pairing that with those rollout bootleg plays where Bryce Underwood's finding guys open because you have to give so many resources to stop the run that now you have fewer people in coverage. So if Michigan's able to run the football early and often, I have to admit it's not going to look good for Nebraska on Saturday.
Okay, to answer your question, Darren, yes, Houston Christian is an FCS team, D1. I never heard of them either, to be honest, before they came to Nebraska. The reason that we played them is we run a summer satellite camp down there. So we've gotten a couple of recruits out of that. And it's a nice campus, that we can run camps from. So, but that 45-yard run that you talked about, so at halftime, we pulled all of our starters and we were able to put in our second and third string, like I mentioned before. And so that was against, I believe, our third string. That stat that you were talking about.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah. So, one of the things that we know is really important for this game is for us to stop the run. John Butler has addressed it, and he's even addressed a little bit of how we're going to get to that point. So I have complete faith in that. He's talked about earning the right to rush the passer and closing in. So I just really think that they already know, the tactics that we need, what Michigan is going to do. Yeah, Justice Hayes is fantastic. I'd hand it to him all day long, because he can find an opening. But I think that it's kind of like chess. You just have to think ahead. Okay, this is what we're going to be doing to stop this run. So, as well as it's Dylan Raiola's second year as the play caller, and I feel like with Dana Holgerson being the play caller for him, the offensive coordinator, he's known for putting up big yards, throwing yards and rushing yards, but just making it easy, making it simple, allowing Dylan to be Dylan. Dylan's great at, kind of like checking to see, right before the snap, right, to see if we need to make adjustments. So I think you're going to see a lot of that in this game. He's going to be using his football IQ. And I think that just comes with experience in the Big Ten. He's played an entire season. So for that reason, I am choosing Nebraska. Are we doing score predictions right now?
You can if you want, or you can just say which team you're picking and why.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go. I think Dana Holgerson's going to get us over 30. So I think 31-27. It'll be a close game.
So, like I said, I think this is going to really be a stylistic fight, and I really kind of have a hard time picking because earlier in the week, I definitely leaned a little more Michigan. And I agree with you, Darren. I don't think Nebraska has an amazing run defense, but I keep going back to kind of like the vintage Wisconsin style because I'll be honest, I don't think Michigan has amazing receivers. And I think Bryce Underwood, obviously still is a true freshman quarterback. And so I think if I'm Nebraska's defensive coordinator, I want to play this like an old Wisconsin team. I want to stuff the box and I want to do everything I can to stop the run. And I want to play it a little bit like Iowa, right? Yeah, maybe Michigan is going to get some consistent runs going, but can you do that every single down over and over and over again? I think your goal, if you're Nebraska, is to try and trip Michigan up, right? You just need them, get one negative play where all of a sudden it's, 2nd and 12. And if it's 2nd and 12, can Michigan get into a position where they're able to convert that on a third down? I think that's what you have to play for if you're Nebraska on defense. And if you're Michigan on defense, right, like I said, if you look at the Oklahoma game, John Mateer was able to find holes in Michigan's defense. And, Michigan blitzed, Michigan didn't blitz, and John Mateer, what was I going to say? John Mateer was able to find guys open, regardless of if Michigan was blitzing or not blitzing. Didn't mean he always hit them. And I'm not saying they were open every single time, but there were guys open. And so honestly, I think Dylan Raiola is a little bit of a more polished passer. And I think Nebraska's offensive line is maybe a little bit of an upgrade over Oklahoma's. And so I see this being a little bit of a higher scoring game, right? And I think if you're Michigan, you pretty much need to, right? You need to sell out against the pass. If Nebraska's selling out against the run, you sell out against the pass, make them try and dink and dunk, kind of like Cincinnati tried in their game. And so I think this is going to be a higher scoring game. I lean Nebraska, but I don't say that with a whole lot of confidence. But like I said earlier, and I'll say this again, I think whoever wins this game is probably putting up at least 30 points because I think we're going to see the issues that both defenses have.
I think that it's really fascinating because when I look at how Michigan is built, I see a pretty massively upgraded in terms of talent Cincinnati written everywhere. Even in the way that I think right now, just based on that CMU game, actually, because that was the only game I could see Bryce Underwood run. Watching him run, I would almost argue that maybe it's because he's so athletic, but he looks almost more natural as a runner than a thrower. It was crazy the type of vision that he had, the way on that, fourth down again against an inferior opponent, but off the I think it was a play action pass, he was able to evade the defender and run it in for a score on a totally busted play. He looks like a running back there with the natural vision. And Sorsby was able to run pretty effectively against Nebraska. Now I know first game, they probably have cleaned some of that stuff up. I think that Michigan with QB, if QB run is involved, Michigan in theory should be able to get 200 here or more. If it's not, then that's probably a different conversation. I picked Michigan in my preview and prediction off the idea that Michigan would run the quarterback a bit, and that combined with the running backs and an offensive line that I think, look, it's not elite. I never thought it was in the preseason, didn't even really think it had the capability of being that. But Oklahoma's rolling out in week 2 with a defense that is big, it's physical. Nebraska's is physical, but Nebraska is kind of a physical defense that's a 3-3-5, and it looks like a 1-5-5. Against Cincinnati, it was hard to differentiate early who the defensive linemen and linebackers were. And I would be concerned about that against a team like Michigan. Regardless, though, Nebraska can pass the football. I think they'll be able to find some big plays downfield. I think that Emmett Johnson's good enough to where, although I think Michigan will win D-line versus Nebraska's O-line, he'll find a way to get some yards in big runs. And Nebraska's special teams unit is good enough to where it won't be its Achilles heel. I know it's ranked very low in S&P Plus, but their kicker, Kyle Kunanen's good, and they've been better at returns. I'm not saying they're number one. So funnily enough, Darren, S&P Plus ranks Nebraska's special teams as awful. PFF has them graded number 1. I think intuitively it's probably somewhere in the middle there. Also, the final thing to say is I think that if Nebraska were the better team with the better matchup, and maybe I'm reading too much into things, but I think they would be favored. Just given they're at home, they're 3-0. They've looked pretty good. They've looked better than Michigan. Efficiency-wise, in ESPN's FPI, they are better, like only looking at the results of this year. So I like the matchup for Michigan, and I think at the end of the day, if Nebraska wins, then that's a wonderful win. But they'll probably find another good win or an opportunity for that later in the year against other teams. For Michigan, it's if you want to reach the playoffs, you have to win, unless you think that Nebraska is much better than USC. All right. What do you all think? Talk more about this game, because I do have probably a handful more topics I could discuss, or do we want to move on to some other Big Ten games?
I would like to provide a couple counterpoints to what was said just a couple minutes ago, if that's all right. And I also did forget to get in my pick. I'm fairly confident Michigan will be able to run the ball in this one. And this is the thing. This is the thing that I think people overlook sometimes with a true dual threat quarterback like Bryce Underwood. I watched your preview and prediction, by the way, Sam, and I've seen some people mention it in the comments here too, where the people are saying just load the box against Michigan, rotate your heavy nickel into the box, and just force Bryce Underwood to throw the ball. Or I think someone in your comments section on your preview and prediction video said, well, you just man up against them and make those receivers beat you in man-on-man coverage. And with a quarterback like Bryce Underwood, it's like we saw it against obviously lesser competition, but in moments we also saw it against Oklahoma where he made that crazy throw to Donovan McCulley downfield, or where he did hit some really good throws in that game. I think even though he finished with a bad stat line, speaking of PFF's reviews and other people's reviews, still gave him a good grade for that game. I know former offensive coordinator Al Borges does like a weekly show with Sam Webb, and he still gave Bryce a rather good grade for that game. There was just a lot of missed opportunities there. Obviously, they still ended up losing, but it's like no matter what defense you play, it's almost like a pick your poison thing. Where it's like if you want to man up, by the way, against Michigan, and you want to turn your back to Bryce Underwood, please do so. Like, go ahead. Give him that opportunity to run downfield and take your eyes off of him. If you want to play zone, we saw New Mexico, a New Mexico team who, by the way, just hammered and blew out UCLA. And it looks like they might actually be a better team than what we gave them credit for initially when we beat them. But we saw teams like UNM and Central play zone all day against him, and he hit some throws downfield. We saw kind of a CJ Stroud-esque game out of him. So I think no matter what defense you play against a quarterback like that, especially as he's progressing and getting better, he's going to make some plays because that's just who he is. He wasn't just the number one quarterback in his class. He was the number one overall player for a reason. There's a reason why he has that generational tag that everyone's applying to him. He's one of only 6 or 7 quarterbacks to ever be the number one overall player in his class since we've been doing recruiting rankings. So yeah, I mean, Nebraska's got to contend with that. They've also got to contend with the fact that Michigan's ground game, like we went over a minute ago. The interesting thing to me is Michigan has played 2 defensive lines that lack a lot of 300-pounders in the interior, bullied both of those defensive lines. And I was going over Nebraska's roster earlier today. I only saw one guy listed at over 300 pounds. There's a lack there as well of 300-pounders. And yes, you can want it. Yes, it can be an important game to you. Yes, it can be a big deal. And yes, you can have celebrities leading the team out onto the field. But physics is physics at the end of the day. If you're not as big as the guy bullying you across the line, that's the ball game right there. And that's what I'm looking at here. An interesting thing on Dylan Raiola. Sorry, I'm rambling here just a minute, but again, I'm a stats nerd and I like to get into these things. And I think this actually kind of plays into what Michigan likes to do defensively. So I think this is where this game is really going to come down to. Dylan Raiola, passing success rate of 55.6%. That is awesome. That is really efficient. EPA per dropback of 0.33. That has him in the top 25 in the country. But yards per dropback of just 5.57. That's 99th in the country. And that really stood out to me, where we're still seeing, and I think this was definitely evident in the Cincinnati game that I watched, where Cincinnati played a lot of off coverage. Their corners were 8-10 yards deep. Their safeties were deep. And they forced Nebraska to kind of dink and dunk down the field. Wink Martindale's amoeba defense will do that too. Their base shell is kind of a cover 3 where their corners are playing off. So that kind of plays into Michigan's hand, but also into Nebraska's hand, interestingly enough. And I think this is what really the game is going to come down to. If Nebraska can stop Michigan's run game, and if Nebraska can score in the red zone, because I think they'll get into the red zone frequently because they'll be able, those opportunities on those short and intermediate passes that they like to hit will be there because Michigan's defense will let you hit those all day. This is a defense built to beat Ohio State. And how do you beat Ohio State? You keep them from hitting big plays. You keep your safeties deep. You play cover 3. You play cover 4. You rotate. You make things confusing for the quarterback. So that's really interesting to me. I think if Nebraska can score in the red zone touchdowns instead of field goals, and if they can stop Michigan's run game, I think they got a chance here. Unfortunately, I don't know if that's going to happen.
Darren, we actually agree on that. So kudos to you. Yes, we do need to stop the run game. Absolutely. And we do need to score in the red zone. I mean, Matt Rule actually talked about that in his press conference on Monday, how, our percentage is actually 60s, and he wants us to be more like in the 70s. Okay. But you said something about Dylan Raiola's passing completion. It's actually 76.6%.
Passing success rate is like it's a
Okay.
game on paper, like advanced analytic thing. I know his
Okay.
completion percentage. I can kind of gather what his completion percentage is just off of that yards per dropback. I assume it's really high because that yards per dropback is actually kind of low, which tells me he's hitting a lot of easy passes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, two things actually that I wanted to add was perhaps one of the reasons that the analysts are not picking Nebraska at this point is because, I mean, even you have been burned, Sam, by picking Nebraska. I remember 2 years ago, you were on Corn Crazed and you said, I have great news for Nebraska fans. You guys are probably going to be going bowling. And I'm like, yeah, that's great news, And we didn't. I mean, it's taken time, but I think that we're finally there. And I don't think anybody wants to, put all their eggs in Nebraska's basket based on our track record of, what happened with Scott Frost. And it's just taken time. We had to get all the right pieces in place. And I think that we do. And the other thing is, Underwood is fantastic. There's no qualms about that. He's going to be a fantastic quarterback. But letting your quarterback run the way that he was able to run last week, I don't think I'm not a coach, but aren't you going to get hurt? It is the Big Ten. We've had running quarterbacks at Nebraska before that have played hurt or, had to take games out because they were injured from running. So that's when you get big hits. And I saw in the last game, he even pushed a defender aside with his throwing arm. So I don't know. It's just my 2 cents.
So I think one thing as a Nebraska fan that really excites me about this game is just the potential that you have to see out of the offense. And I know we've kind of talked about things, but one thing that I kind of found interesting, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. So I don't think up to this point in the year, Nebraska has been held to a single 3 and out. And if you look at Oklahoma, Michigan only held Oklahoma to a single 3 and out. And when Darren, you're talking about putting the safeties high, don't give up the explosive plays, I think that's exactly what's going to happen. But I think when you look at the weapons Nebraska has, you're going to see maybe it'll be a little bit dink and dunk, but you're going to see an kind of exciting offense out of Nebraska where I think Nebraska is going to be able to get momentum. And I mean, unless their O-line is just completely getting gashed and Dylan Raiola is just getting torn apart, which I don't expect to happen, I think you're going to see Nebraska's offensive skill players really kind of have a day to, show what they can do. And, essentially, Michigan's going to make them prove if they can go out and beat Michigan. And if you look at just some of the guys they have, we know some of the games, Dane Key, the transfer out of Kentucky. You also have Luke Lindenmeyer, who I believe is a former walk-on Nebraska native, just proposed to his girlfriend a couple weeks ago after the Akron game. He's had really good games so far against Cincinnati and Akron. Houston Christian wasn't his best game, but, he's kind of an exciting player, and he's a guy that could, kind of have a game. Emmett Johnson's really going to be tested, right? Because none of us here are thinking that Nebraska is really going to do a whole lot on the ground. But Emmett Johnson's kind of a little bit of a dynamic running back. I've kind of butted heads with Minnesota fans. I think Emmett Johnson, he's not as fast. He's not as athletic probably as Darius Taylor, but I think in a lot of other aspects, he's probably better. And so I think, you're going to see some exciting guys. And Isaiah Hunter, he's kind of a guy who he's had his ups and he's had his downs with Nebraska, but he brings a lot of explosive play potential. And so I think this is really going to be a fun game where if Nebraska can get going on offense, you might see a couple of those guys, kind of blow up, and you might see an offensive guy have a good game. But, like Darren said, Nebraska is going to have to go out and earn it. And it's not going to, I don't think Nebraska is going to be gashing Michigan's defense. You're not going to see, 45-yard play here, 50-yard play here. Although Oklahoma did kind of gash Michigan with some 30-yard plays. But, I think that there's a lot of potential for just kind of some high-flying offense from Nebraska. And, maybe if you're Dana Holgorsen, can you find a way to exhaust Minnesota's defense with that? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a matchup of styles. And I have to say that I picked Oklahoma to beat Michigan, and I was not the most confident in it, but I stuck with it because of just the hypothetical kind of on paper matchup that was presented, where I knew that Oklahoma at that point should have had the better QB, definitely had the better receivers, definitely had the better secondary, and was at home. So unless Michigan was definitively better, I should pick Oklahoma. And I'm glad I did. In fact, Oklahoma handily beat Michigan in a way that I wasn't quite expecting. I mean, if not for penalties and some questionable kind of game fundamental mistakes by Oklahoma, it could have been a blowout. It's a game I'm not confident in picking. I said that in my preview and prediction. I guess I sided with Michigan for really reasons Darren discussed. Just the size that Michigan has. I also think that while Nebraska, Brooks Austin, for whatever reason on his channel, said that Nebraska doesn't have weapons, and I just kind of thought, well, whatever. Like, it's like you haven't seen what they got in the portal. Like, that's just insane. Runs a good channel, but that was a take that really irritated me. However, I think
sorry to interrupt. Can I just say I love Brooks Austin? He has all the energy of a used car salesman with a DUI on his record, and I love it.
Yeah, I can definitely see that for sure. Mateer's legs were a big part of Oklahoma's game, and also just I don't know. I think I've exhausted a lot of my discussion on this game, especially since I still have my 10 reasons why each team will win, and I don't want to delve too much into that. But I think that the mobility of Underwood, and contrasting that even with the mobility of Raiola, of which he does not have what Underwood does, that kind of will balloon the rushing differences in my mind, where Michigan naturally is going to, in theory, again, in practice, I could be totally wrong. In theory, Michigan should be able to run the ball better and stop the run better. You add on mobile QB for Michigan, and the fact that Raiola probably isn't going to be pulling zone reads all that often, with the exception of maybe some, I know they've done that on some like third and shorts where he keeps it, the defense is surprised, he picks it up. I think Nebraska definitely has a coaching edge here. I just think that the coaching edge isn't necessarily massive, one. And two, as Darren's referenced, it's a size thing. Like Oklahoma, defensive line-wise, linebacker-wise, they still run a 4-3, technically. Now, they can like move out of that and run more of a 4-2-5 nickel, but they have 4 down D linemen in a cheetah position that's like a hybrid safety linebacker D end. So they can put 7 people in the box or more than that. And 7 of them will be, front 7 linebacker D-line players. I think that Michigan coming into another hostile environment, I would expect false starts, but I think as the game goes on, it will be another Oklahoma test in a way, but it will be tuned down a bit because the offense won't be so constricted by the Nebraska defense. And then for the Nebraska offense, I like aspects of what they do more than Oklahoma, like the offensive line, as Far mentioned and as Minnie mentioned. It's a good O-line. But I do think that Oklahoma's quarterback causes more issues for Michigan's defense than Raiola will. And I don't quite know who has better receivers at this point. So, yeah, just as some wrapping up of the final thoughts from what all of you had to say. Let's move on for the final few minutes. Talk a little bit about Illinois, Indiana, as that's the other Big Ten game of the week. Interesting question off the top of my head. Do we think any of Illinois or Indiana are better than one or both of Nebraska and Michigan? Any of them? Both? One? None?
That's so hard to answer at this time of year, man. This is like the silly season for college football where everyone's played cupcakes and we're trying to like read into the tea leaves as to who's actually good, right? Like some teams have played legitimate foes. Like both of the teams we've talked about tonight have played Power 4 teams so far. But like have Indiana or Illinois beat Duke pretty handily, so that's fair. Talent-wise, on paper, talent-wise, I do like my own little version of the blue chip ratio over on my channel, and both Nebraska and Michigan on paper have more talent than either of those teams. And you know my opinion on Indiana, Sam. I think they kind of rode a subpar schedule last year to what they got and then got bullied in the trenches. I think if Michigan or Nebraska played either of those teams right now, it'd honestly be kind of close. I really do.
Darren, I hate to agree with you again, but I do. Yeah, I love Illinois. I think they're a fantastic team. I think they have a lot of veterans. That's their key to success right there. Indiana, they just shocked the world last season, and this weekend is the true test. So it'll be an interesting game. I also don't really know who to choose, but if I had to choose one, it would be Illinois, just simply for the veteran so that they have back.
Maybe I'm too far out over my skis here, but honestly, if I were Michigan or Nebraska, I don't want to go up against Indiana or Illinois. I think Cignetti and Bielema have both proven that they're really good coaches. And, I don't know. Gosh, I think Matt Rule and Sherrone Moore both have a lot to prove in that regard. And, you look at Illinois last year, they came out cosplaying as a 1920s football team and handled Michigan. And I think Michigan's a little bit better, but I don't think Illinois is that much worse. They lost a really amazing wide receiver, but I still think Brett Bielema is there, and Illinois is a really solid football team. And, Curt Cignetti, it's a small body of work, but from what we've seen, Curt Cignetti smokes them through the filter, right? So if I'm Michigan or Nebraska, I don't want anything to do with Indiana or Illinois, and I don't think Nebraska has either of them scheduled, or Michigan. So, I think for all of us here, we're probably fortunate we don't see those matchups this year.
That's
give Cignetti some credit. He's the guy that cuts the filters off, and in between taking hits of dip out of his can too. Let's not forget, this is a good old Southern boy we're talking about here.
He just rolls his own.
Yeah, I don't think it's any secret that I love especially Curt Cignetti and what Indiana has done. I fell too far down the rabbit hole with them last year for sure. But I think I'm pretty, maybe not measured. I don't think measured's the correct word, but I believe that Indiana's a really good football team. I know they've played garbage, but how they have ran the ball, how Mendoza's progressed every week, and the fact that while Illinois is veteran laden, Indiana is too. Indiana's pretty old, especially on defense. If I were to rank these teams right now, I would probably go Indiana 1, Michigan 2, Nebraska 3, and Illinois 4. I think that they would all play each other pretty competitively, although I do think that looking at Cignetti's track record, it's so far extended into this year. We'll see if it extends into the Illinois game. Whenever he has similar talent to his opponent or superior talent, which is very rare when you look at their blue chip ratio, they usually gain control and dominate their opponents pretty effectively. And then it's when they match up against Ohio State, Notre Dame, Michigan would have beaten them, and maybe even handily if they had a good quarterback last year. That's really when things began to unravel. And part of that was because of their injuries too on the offensive line, which is natural as you play through a whole season. I'm very high on Indiana this year. I think that there's a good chance with some of the losses that we've seen other teams incur early that they could go back to the playoffs. Would I pick it now? I don't know. But this is actually something Darren and I have disagreed on before. He thinks they're a little bit of a flukish team last year, or at least he leans that way. And I'm kind of more in the boat of, no, they're legitimate. Like, they clearly have limitations. They're not going to beat certain teams until they prove themselves. But I really like what they did last year. And I think this year's team is going to replicate that. Les Austin decided to super chat us, gave us a $2 super chat. So thank you to that. He said, will any Nebraska fans bet super chats? Go Blue. Thank you for that, Austin. Any games that you guys are looking forward to outside of Nebraska and Michigan?
I'm honestly just interested to see what USC does, and can they carry this offensive momentum into the Big Ten season. I think they play Michigan State this weekend.
Yes.
And Michigan State's like highest graded defensive back on PFF like this last week was like a 65. And USC, if you look at the offensive statistics on Game on Paper, they're getting 10.79 yards per play right now offensively. That's like a whole 3 yards more than the second best team in Arkansas in that metric. So that might be a big time blowout. And USC looking like a typical Lincoln Riley team where they just murder people offensively. Obviously, the question will be, can they do anything defensively? Because I think they played Purdue this past weekend and actually gave up some drives.
They did.
So that's interesting. They basically won that game on the fact that Purdue turned the ball over on downs a few times. That's just an interesting one to me, just again, because I'm like a stats nerd and I see USC topping out the charts offensively right now. And I'm like, can they keep doing that?
Well, like I said, I'll be at the Nebraska-Michigan game, so I'm really just focused in on that and looking at any kind of weaknesses that I can see. I know, one of the problems that you guys might have is an offensive line. Like, who's going to be on your offensive line? So I'm just sticking with that because I'm just really curious. I finally got my tickets this morning, got really good seats, like right on the 40-yard line. And yeah, I can't wait. So it'll be a good game.
Yeah. So one game I'm really excited for is the Texas Tech Utah game. I think Texas, right? Both of these teams in the last 2 years have really kind of been disappointing, right? Utah just with the will they, won't they with who was their quarterback? Cam Rising, and him, that was just a terrible situation at quarterback. And they've just been really disappointing the last 2 years. And, Texas Tech, will see what they can do with a $50 million roster. So, I think that's going to be a really fun matchup. And if you're interested in the Big 12 at all, that's whoever wins that matchup probably has a pretty good shot to win the conference. And then maybe I'm just a little bit of a sicko, but Rutgers, Iowa really intrigues me. Maybe part of it's just the Nebraska fan, right? I think Ethan Koliak-Manis has played really well up to this point in the year, right? And Mark, how do you say it? Gronowski? I think that's the name.
Gronowski. Yeah, it's really easy to just say Gronkowski because we've said that name for our entire life.
So Mark Gronowski, he's kind of been disappointing, and so far it looks like he's just really out of his depth at the FBS level. But there was a little disrespect coming towards Iowa earlier, and Iowa is Iowa, but there's a reason Kirk Ferentz has been there since 1999. Iowa just kind of finds a way to rock fight their way to wins, and I'm really excited to see what happens there, right? Because I don't think Iowa has a good offense, but I don't think Rutgers has a good defense. They put up, what did Ohio put up against them? 40 points? Some crazy number. So yeah, I think that's just going to be a really fun kind of sick game. Just to, I guess, especially as a Nebraska fan, be nice to see Iowa, struggle against Rutgers, maybe give us a little bit of hope. So yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to.
Can I interject with one more real quick? I just pulled up the schedule for this weekend. I'm looking at Maryland, Wisconsin, because I am also a sicko. And I don't think if Wisconsin can't beat Maryland this weekend, I don't know if they win another game this season.
They won't. I mean, Maryland is awful as someone who's watched them go 3-0. I probably not closely enough to tell you how awful, but when you're competing with NIU in the third quarter and they're out rushing you, that is a sign that things are just not happy. Thank you, random Jordan fan, for the $5 super chat. No comment there, just says "Go Big Red" below it. I really appreciate the $5 and the support. I am excited to watch all those games. In fact, I've done previews for all of those games. So Wisconsin, Maryland, I released just before we went live. USC, Michigan State has been up for a few days. And Texas Tech, Utah is going to be one I'm going to release after we get off of here. I actually like Utah in that game. I think that Whittingham is an infinitely better coach than Joey McGuire, and I love Devin Dampier. For USC, Michigan State, I kind of think there's only 3 or 4 combined punts in that matchup. I just think Michigan State has all of them. I don't see how that secondary or that D-line that I think is good at run stop but can't get pressure to save their life. It's like a Temu version of Michigan's D-line. Not very good at getting pressure, okay at stopping the run. I don't see how they're going to stop USC at home at 11 p.m. Eastern time. It's so bad, and it's a shame that it's getting played that late. I don't think that kickoffs between teams of that time zone distance should be heavily one-sided in either direction. But that's just me. It's maybe me, even as a 22-year-old, being old man yelling at clouds. I don't know. But I'm going to stay up for that entire USC MSU game. I would not be shocked if they combined for 90 points, because I don't think USC can reliably stop the run against a O-line that can block the run well. And I think MSU can do that with the mobile QB.
Yeah, the guys on MGO blog in their most recent podcast had a really good point on USC's defense, where they brought in D'Anton Lynn, right, to kind of build the amoeba defense, which is what Michigan is also running. Comes from like the Ravens tree in the NFL, right? But if you look at D'Anton Lynn's career trajectory, he was only with the Ravens for like a season or two. He's not like one of the guys, like when Michigan brought in guys to teach that defense to their players, they brought in like Mike McDonald and Jesse Minter and now Wink Martindale, who was like, those guys were like the founders of that defense who like originated it, right? Who like invented it. And D'Anton Lynn's kind of a guy who's like, he was familiar, worked with that defense for a couple of seasons, but it's like, is he a guy who's really qualified to teach that defense? And also, does USC have the players to play well that defense? That defense really hinges on defensive tackles who are able to two gap and play against the run game really effectively. And from what I've seen, it doesn't really look like they have that. So they can't play with those light boxes and defend the run, which is exactly what you're seeing with them right now.
Yeah, I think it's USC all day long, for sure. Lincoln Riley is such a great coach. I mean, the way that he can coach up quarterbacks is amazing. Last year, when Nebraska played against them, I think it was our like third to last game, and I was out there, and we almost won. It was like 13-10, I want to say, was like the score. I can't even remember, but I think it was like we lost by 3. But that was the game that he pulled his starting quarterback and benched him and then put in a new quarterback. It's like, how do you do that with so much confidence and still beat us? But so yeah, USC. But I wanted to say about Texas Tech and Utah this weekend, it's like kind of like who we're playing, the oil money versus the Mormon money. Who has more? Because I know Texas Tech definitely bought their roster. They paid a lot for it. It'll be interesting to see.
For the record, I do think USC is going to be Michigan State too. It's just going to look like Sam said, it's going to look like Texas Tech versus Oklahoma back in the day.
Oh my gosh. That will be bad.
Except both quarterbacks are Temu versions of the quarterbacks from that game.
Yeah, don't go calling Utah Mormon. That's a good way to start a fight. Fortunately, this is a Big Ten channel, so might be able to duck that. But Yeah, I think what Lincoln Riley has been able to do with Jaden Mayava so far this season is really impressive. Just if you look at his stats, and yeah, I think that what time does this game kick off again?
11 p.m. Eastern time.
Oh gosh. Yeah, that's a terrible spot for Michigan State. I think you just try and survive that game, honestly. I mean, that's a terrible time to kick. So, I mean, what if a game's 3 hours, you're getting done at like 2 a.m. Eastern time? Yeah, that's just a terrible spot to be in. But yeah, in USC though, I'm curious to see what they do, just because they've granted the Purdue game had the whole rain delay and everything, but they've just been running it up on everybody else they've played. And with Illinois coming the week after Michigan State, I don't know. I almost wonder, does he run it up? Is Lincoln Riley trying to create another Heisman, or does he maybe pull his guys and maybe hope he has a shot to take down Illinois? I honestly don't know what to say. I don't know what Lincoln Riley's going to do there.
All right. I think this was a pretty good show. Thank you guys for coming on. It's crossed the hour mark, so I think it is a appropriate time to close out the show here, especially since I have just for all of those of you who are watching, I have a members only live at 10 p.m. So just in 55 minutes, where I'm going to go over 10 reasons why Michigan can beat Nebraska, why Nebraska can beat Michigan. I'll actually be using a lot of what what you said, Darren, for the Michigan one. I was going to do some research beforehand, and the game on paper stuff is pretty helpful. So
feel free to use it. I don't own the rights to it. I'm just a nerd over here.
Oh, I've been playing with game on paper. I've absolutely been playing with game on paper. It's very fun. So thank you for recommending me to that in text. Thank you guys so much for coming on. And to any viewers, if you want to watch me at 10 p.m., you just got to sign up as one of the members that are allowed to view the show. It'll be 10 reasons for Nebraska, Michigan. We're actually doing 15 for Indiana because I think that Indiana is really going to pedal to the metal here. And then we'll also talk about how Michigan State and Illinois can pull off upsets, if at all possible. You can, for the channels, because people are asking, Darren's channel, This Week in Michigan Football, it's like one of the first things that comes up when you look at it. Same with Darren Talks Ball. For Mini Hunt, it's Corn Nation. It's, again, same as it sounds, just Corn Nation. It's an icon of a corn cob with a Nebraska flag. Far.
Oh, and there's one other. I do I do the voice of college football, the ladies of college football on Sundays.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for letting us know about that.
Yep.
Do you do anything, Far? I know that you were kind of a last minute addition, but if you have anything, you can plug it to us.
No, not particularly, no.
Okay. Well, we will see you back here with a variety of different guests next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, like the video. I appreciate all you so much. Go blue and go big red.